Hello and welcome to the Patty Pod, Season 2, Episode 15. We are coming to you from Brooklyn this evening. It is January, 21st. We're in the thick of it, thick of the winter. Night has fallen upon New York City. It is 6:35. It's cold outside. Not by Minnesota standards, certainly, but cold by New York standards. And I'm feeling it. I think the feels like is 18. It's been cold this last week. It snowed. We got our first snowfall, which meant that I had to shovel a little bit at my school, but it went fairly well, so I was grateful for that. And then it snowed again, just an inch or two. Not enough to do a lot in. My niece and nephew made snow angels, and they made a small little kind of slide, and so they made the best of it. Back in 2020, we had a significant snowfall, and I went over to their house, and I helped build this kind of slide, this snow slide that had steps on the back and an incline on the front, and I could get them up there into their little plastic sled and push them down, and they quite enjoyed that. So they tried to replicate it, but we really didn't have much snow to go on. But they said they had fun playing in the snow in any case. It's fun to see kids get excited about snow. My students got excited. It's kind of like that unjaded look at the world. It's not wonder, at least appreciation. So I try to remember that. I try to get some of that spirit in my own life. So it was a pretty good week, couple weeks since I last did our podcast. The last one was early January. And it's hard to get back into the swing of things. I think maybe I recorded right after my first day back. And the kids came back. It is hard. It is hard to get back in the swing of things, I think, for probably everybody after the holidays. It was a little bit rocky and happened to have some very emotional parents, the most emotional parents that I've had to interact with, that were somewhat upset with me in my 6 years of teaching, and that happens to fall on the same day. So that was a bit of a boat rocker. I was going to say I was rattled, but it really kind of rocked. It felt more like a rocking of the boat. I think it went pretty well. I was able to talk through some of it. I think we, in both scenarios, were able to get to some kind of a resolution, at least feeling a little bit better. So I was grateful for that. It was kind of tough. It was kind of tough. I was glad to have a 3-day weekend last week. This particularly tough day happened on the Friday before then, so it was good to have a couple days to get away from it. I continued to visit art museums. I went to last week, well, maybe it was the week before, I went to the Whitney again. Saw some of the permanent collection. Spent some time with the Calder Circus. He is an artist. I guess he was an American who lived in France and developed this kind of miniature circus using figures and items that he fashioned out of wire and wood and cloth and other kind of common materials. And I spent some time with some of the other 20th century art that I like, some of the pop art. I saw George Morrison, who was a Minnesota abstract expressionist, an inspiring figure to me. He was a Native American. I think he probably described himself as Chippewa. The people who are normally now refer to themselves as Ojibwe or I believe Anishinaabe. In any case, he grew up really far north near Grand Portage, Minnesota, and was able to get himself to a New York art school in the early 20th century and become a prominent figure in the world of abstract expressionism, which was almost exclusively the domain of white men. He did some abstract work with wood, kind of like, I guess, a mix of sculpture and painting. It's sort of like a flat plane, like a painting, but it was comprised of pieces of wood that had been cut and assembled. And then he also did work with more traditional paint and canvas. So I always like seeing his stuff. It feels like, somebody from the home team. And kind of like, if he can make it, I can make it kind of idea, I think is what I get from him and his work. Plus, I just like the work on its own. I like the display of colors and the materiality, the physicality of some of his work. And, he had a good kind of handling or good mastery of form, I think, color and line. So that was fun. I got to go this week to the Guggenheim and to the Neue Gallery. The Neue Gallery does predominantly Viennese modernism, and the Guggenheim's contemporary and modern art. Guggenheim is the famous building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright with the kind of a big spiral gallery. I believe they call it the Rotunda. And so I saw that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in upcoming episodes, but I've continued my art kick. So that's been fun. We can't play hockey outside. Can't play roller hockey, I should say, because of the weather. We did get the snow and the ice, and it's been cold, so it's stuck, which allowed me to do the museum visit on Saturday. And today, I attended my nephew's basketball game. It was a tough one for the young lad. I believe Dylan is 8 now. I'm forgetting if he's 7 or 8, but he's young. He's in 2nd grade, and his team was outmatched pretty greatly. They went down 24-0. It was kind of hard to watch. They had a number of opportunities to score, but each shot either missed the net altogether or hit the rim and bounced off, or hit the backboard and bounced off. So he was a little upset, but handled it pretty well. And it was fun to be with him and his parents and his sister and watch that. It's nice that they live near us. They just picked me up on the way to the gym. It's not a place that's easily accessible by public transportation, so it was nice to do that today, have a little family time. I haven't seen my niece and nephew for a while because they were out of town during the holidays, so that was fun. Speaking about art, I'm trying to remember. I feel like I went to another museum, but I might be wrong. I'm trying to remember. I think it was just the Whitney, the previous week. I feel like I played hockey on Martin Luther King Day, but one of those days I did not. Oh, I went to the Dia. That's right, I was going to talk about that. I went to the Dia Chelsea Museum. Dia is the home of a lot of conceptual art, which is sort of a movement that was in the 70s, associated with sometimes with people that did land art as well. They have a space in Soho called they have 2 spaces that feature the work of Walter De Maria, who's an artist that I like. I'm not going to mention one of them because I like to try to surprise people with a visit to the space. But the other space is, I think it's called Broken Kilometer, and he took like a rod, a golden rod that was 1 kilometer long, and he separated it into a bunch of different pieces, and they're arranged in different ways on the floor, extending into space, and you can't go through walking through the space, but you can stand at the bottom and view this kilometer all broken up. It's an interesting idea because we always think about kilometers, I think, in terms of measuring, kind of roads between cities or between larger points. So to see it kind of broken up in this way is sort of a reorientation of an idea in your head, which is always, I think, a good experience for me to have something get reoriented. I almost always appreciate that, because sometimes it's maybe the mundane that gets to me. So I did that. I went to, that's a little bit about Dia. I went to their Chelsea space, and they have an artist named, I think her name is Darcy. I have it here. Darcy Morelos, I believe is her name. Delcy Morelos, who did a piece called El Abrazo, which I believe means hug in Spanish. I believe she's a Hispanic artist. I forget exactly where she's from. Somewhere in Latin America. I think Central America, if I'm not mistaken. But she does these earth-based pieces. In one room, the walls and floor were basically covered in a mixture of earth and paint. It was kind of a soil paint, and you could walk down kind of a pathway through the center, and there were little accumulations of actual soil and clay, like little clay figurines or pottery that I think were in the style of some of the native indigenous people from where she was from. And then there was another room that had this large structure that looked like a ziggurat or some kind of a temple, 25 feet high, and it was kind of slanted, so you walked in and it would, this structure was taking up, I don't know, about a room almost the size of a football field, maybe not that big, but maybe say 70 yards by 40 yards, and it slanted upward. It was this earthen structure that had soil, and it went all the way basically to the ceiling, and it kind of looked like a cube that had been slanted on the sides, and there was grasses that looked like they were growing out of, some dry grasses that looked like they were growing out of the sides. So you could walk down to one end of it, and as you got to the back wall and you turned, you saw that there was kind of a slit that had been cut or created that was into the center of this kind of cube-looking structure. And it was a long slit that came to a point at the end, like a V shape, and you could walk right down to the very vertex of the V. And as you did, the walls, of course, closed in, and there are these giant earthen walls with these grasses sticking out. She'd used cinnamon and cloves as well in the mixture, so you could smell this wonderful clove cinnamon smell. And I wanted to walk. It just felt like it was, asking you to walk right down the center of this vertex, and then you get this feeling that you're being closed in. And it's funny because I could imagine a lot of people feeling claustrophobic in that space, but I felt it as kind of comforting. And there were other people around. When I got to the gallery, got to the museum, I sort of felt like people were talking too loudly for a museum, and there were kind of a lot of people coming and going, and I was sort of annoyed. And I felt myself wanting to walk deeper and deeper and deeper into this space to get away from all that and to get away from the sound and just even seeing people. And it was interesting to me because I thought I could have easily been feeling claustrophobic. And in fact, there were moments where I kind of did. I just walked down that vertex and I sat there for a minute and you were allowed to lightly touch, so I sort of gently and lightly touched the earth and the grasses and took in the scents, and it was sort of a dark space, which is something that I like. I like being kind of enclosed. It makes me feel protected. I remember once reading that Bob Dylan said that he likes being in New York because he liked to feel closed in by the buildings, is what I assume he meant. And I definitely resonate with that idea. So that was a little bit about my last couple of weeks, some of my adventures in art. Speaking of art, I was thinking about funding for the arts. And I know there's always been a debate about the National Endowment for the Arts, this federal program. Usually it's people on the right that don't want it funded. And I think a lot of times it's because some of the funding has gone to projects that have a left-leaning political message. And I can understand that they wouldn't want to fund it. But I do think there should be some funding for art that comes from the government. I think that if we just let the free market be the source of income for everything, then I think we can end up with, for sometimes in a worst case scenario, you could end up with bread and circuses. Not only bread and circuses, a preponderance of bread and circuses. There's a place for them, but if that's all there is, it's not a rich life. And I used to find that maybe not so convincing when I was younger, but I definitely, as I get older, I find that convincing. I understand that things should... I do hear the argument that, we all want to try things, and we should let, if we're going to do something, we need to find people to support it. But at the same time, I guess I'll say it again, I don't want all of society's output to be based on the free market. Sometimes I think with art, you can get some strange and awkward seeming and unpopular ideas that are expressed, even things that seem ugly, even things that seem offensive, that down the road come to be cherished. And there are instances of that all throughout art history, and really through history in general. So I think I've been embracing this idea of being surprised by things and hearing things that seem to go against kind of my worldview. And not everything, of course, but I like reorienting myself, as I mentioned earlier. Having something reoriented for me, I think is really important. I think it can be helpful for other people too. So that's me. It's my thoughts about art funding and art. Kate and I went to a luncheonette back in the end of December, and this is old-fashioned, kind of beloved soda fountain kind of place where they serve old-fashioned drinks like egg creams and milkshakes and things like that. It's called the Lexington Candy Shop. It's on the Upper East Side. And we got an egg cream and a milkshake just for a little treat. We had been, I think we had gone to El Museo del Barrio that day, which is a museum of Latin American culture and art primarily. In any case, I saw a sign there hanging on the wall that I thought was good. It said, "Lord, give me the opportunity to prove to you that I can win the lottery and remain humble." And I thought, I haven't heard that one. Maybe I'll write that down on a card, put it in my wallet. I can do it, Lord. Just give me the opportunity. Let's move to the essay corner. This was written in the summer during my time off and my essay writing spree. So I'm just going to jump into it. Tonight is the first night of the week where I'm not allowed to read, watch TV, listen to the radio or podcasts, go on social media, or have long, chatty conversations. This is part of the Artist Way program. I thought, of course, I'd chronicle it. Apparently, I'm narrating my life all the time now. I'm on summer break and filled part of my day with the artist's way tasks, including describing my dream environment. The book prompted, city or country, cozy or swank. I thought I'd have a hard time deciding between city and country as I really love them both. What I don't like is the suburbs, trite as that may sound. I ended up choosing the city, though, because ultimately that's where I want to spend most of my time. I already have a building picked out for when I strike it rich. I described how I'd buy the top 2 floors and how I'd decorate this grand apartment near Prospect Park in Brooklyn. I also drew it and colored it in with colored pencils. I've become a decent little drawer and colorer since doing it with my kids in class. Then I had to write about my favorite season, summer, and clip out a picture from a magazine that represented it. Finally, I had to write my version of the artist's prayer. As I write that, I'm glad that I can count myself as an artist. I think I've always wanted to. That reminds me that I'm glad I'm creating these days, writing and podcasting, and proud of myself. That's not a sentiment I feel very often. I'm sorry to say. I don't hate myself, but feeling proud of myself, especially with work, is difficult when I'm frequently worrying about not doing enough. I do wish that I could create like I have been full-time. I think of an old friend who really blew up her life, getting divorced and quitting her career to become a writer. It seems so bold and dangerous. I couldn't help but try to decipher what her successes were and what her struggles were via social media as I tried to decide what to do with my life. The spiritualists and the existentialists tell us that we are the ones who choose our lives. I don't know, maybe I don't believe them. Maybe I don't believe the spiritualists who also promise that we can change reality by changing our thinking and by changing how we feel about ourselves. I think I struggle sometimes to believe them because I'm not excited to get out of bed in the morning. That's my goal and my litmus test. Am I happy to get out of bed in the morning? Is God laughing at that? I've heard humans scoff at it rather recently. I heard Eckhart Tolle tell a tale on a video I watched last night. He said a woman told her husband that she was going to test Jesus' teaching that our faith could move mountains. She looked at a small mound in her yard and announced that she'd use her faith to make it disappear by morning. Morning came and the mound was still there. When she saw it, she said, "Oh, I knew this was never going to work." I wondered, is this my faith? Is this why I'm not living a life I'm excited to wake up to? How many times have I asked myself this question? I've learned to let heat pass and not stoke the flames any. I've learned I can do that, and it actually works. It was as if one of my friends from up north had taught me how to properly tend to a dying campfire. I knew they'd learned it from their father, and we could all see it work with no question. It let us get the warmth we needed without any burns. My heat does subside eventually, and I try to wait patiently for some kind of an answer. This might be as good as it gets for a man like me at 43. Right now, I'll take it. So that was the essay. A couple weeks ago, I saw the Blackhawks play the Edmonton Oilers. There was it was a big kind of ballyhooed matchup of superstar rookie Connor Bedard against superstar Connor McDavid, the world's greatest hockey player. Connor McDavid wears number 97, and Connor Bedard wears number 98. And there was a woman in the stand with a sign that said, Connor 97 versus Connor 98. And I thought to myself, whoa, what does she have? Access to a roster? This is incredible stuff. She's a hockey insider. I saw a man in the summer who I play hockey with. I just ran into him on the street. I didn't really talk to him, actually. I saw him from some distance and just thought I'd let him go on. I don't know him that well. And I saw his body language. He was with a woman that I assumed to be his romantic partner. And I saw him bending down to hear her speak. And he might have been holding her hand. And I really noted the femininity of his body language and his behavior. that was such a contrast to the masculinity that I see at hockey. And he's not like a real hothead or anything, but it's a different mode for sure. I was seeing a different mode. So it got me thinking about the masculine and the feminine. And I thought to myself that I think sports and competition are a good way to experience the masculine, like I do with this guy. Especially it's good at kind of practicing asserting yourself, I think. You know, even practicing beating somebody at something, which can anger them. And that kind of, you know, angering them can, I guess, could be thought of as kind of a harm that you're doing to them in pursuit of your goal. I think I need to be better accepting that I'm going to anger people in pursuit of my goals, especially if it's going to happen at work. I do think that everyone needs to assert themselves, and you're going to disappoint people or anger people, especially at work, as you go about your life doing that. It's just, there's always going to be different points of view. And I think you can do it and still maintain a peaceful being in the world. You know, I wonder sometimes why I ponder these ideas like masculinity and femininity, these abstract ideas. I think sometimes that humans have been doing this for millennia, and maybe they've been unnecessarily tying themselves into emotional knots, or, you know, causing themselves more anguish maybe than we need to as we think through these things. And, you know, I think for something, especially in these kind of dichotomies like femininity and masculinity, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And I kind of think about how we need to find a sort of Hegelian synthesis that I've talked about before, where it's like we should try to find ways to take the best of both, and discard the things that aren't working. But I think, you know, even as I tire kind of thinking through these things, I do think that part of what's happening is each generation needs to take up these concepts, and each generation is going to engage with them in a different way, in a totally unique set of circumstances, of course, right? They're different people. The culture always has changed rather drastically, it seems like. There's different, of course, received knowledge, and so I think each generation kind of pushes humanity further down. I do think that there's progress that happens from a long-term perspective, and that's why we keep needing to talk about these things, because it's a different situation. The conversation about femininity and masculinity is different today than it was 5 years ago, and it's different for this generation, for the generations that are living now. You know, it's different for young people for sure than it was when I was young, and it's different as a person who's 44 now than it was for someone who was 44 10 years ago even. So I think that's part of why these conversations continue. I hope that we keep finding better ways to be in the world with, in this example, you know, be feminine and be masculine, and find ways that are more just and more fun. So recovery has this idea, the recovery movement, of attraction, not promotion. And when it comes to spreading the message about, and that's what they have when it comes to spreading their message. They want to attract people rather than kind of trying to convert or selling people on things. So I think about that. I've always kind of trying to take that approach when I talk about spirituality. I like that idea. But I kind of had this idea that I was going to become so enlightened that I would just radiate peace and love, and people would eventually come up to me and want to know how I got that way. That's how it would happen. But it didn't happen. So I had to start this podcast and talk about it on this podcast. You know, I was like, what the fuck, man? You know, where are all the people? Can't they see how peaceful I am? So yeah, that's a little bit about why the dash of spirituality is in the podcast. Yeah, I like the phrase party animal. I've always liked that phrase. I think it's funny. We'll take a turn to the language corner. I think about Animal from the Muppets, that character. We used to listen to the John Denver and the Muppets Christmas album at my house growing up, and whenever I think about Animal, I think of when he's singing this one part, he goes, "Ride, ride, reindeer!" That's just kind of like how he talks. If you ever see him, he plays the drums like a crazy person. He's Animal. He's an animal. Anyway, I think it's important to have this kind of. I don't use drugs and I don't drink, and but I want to keep. I do like this idea of a party animal, like still being obviously like getting rest and taking care of yourself, but it's the abandonment. It's the occasional abandonment that I don't do enough. I need to do that more. So I'm going to try to keep that in my mind. There's all these mantras that I kind of think about sometimes, and all is well, and I'm good enough and smart enough, and think new thoughts, feel new feelings. These are things that sort of repeat in my head when I'm not feeling it well, and I don't know. I think I've got to mix in party animal into that. Sticking with language, I'm keeping my not just there's the celebrate language side of the language corner, the language segment, and then I've had this idea of things we need to change. I'm sticking with that. My curmudgeonly stop it side of the language corner. Journey is one of these. Oh my goodness, I've been thinking about this for a while. We've got to stop with the word journey. The ubiquity of the word journey. I'm looking especially at you, advertisers and marketers. If you're talking about motherhood, fine, you're on a journey. If you're talking about your career journey, okay, I get it. That's a journey. You can use that word. We do not have deodorant selecting journeys. No, I'm putting my foot down. Absolutely not. If I see another ad when they're like, in your car buying journey, we can be your partner. No, I'm sorry, okay? I buy socks, I go, I look, I try to find something that I like, that's comfortable, that looks good. It's not a journey. We need to take that back. I had the idea of the penalty flag from football. I'm going to be throwing those. I got to somehow digitize that, and then maybe I'll just troll Twitter or something, and then when I see them, I'm going to start lobbing them at various brands that are doing that. It's not okay. I thought last week I told somebody this story. I used to date a woman from Spain, and she used to say beaches a lot. I never really understood. She goes, "Patrick, I hate these beaches." And I'd have to say, "Sorry, are you talking about the sandy shoreline or the women that are in your department?" I don't know. Hey, we're thrifty, Kate and I, but she edges me out. She had a faulty pair of earphones that she was using for probably a whole year. I guess they were fine. It's just that when she talked on the phone, the other person couldn't hear her. Otherwise, they were perfectly fine. Great earphones. Glad we kept them going for a year. I thought this week about friends' parents when I was a kid, and parents' friends, and how much they meant to me. I really loved those relationships when I was a kid. I think probably I spent a little bit more time with my friends' parents, but it was great because there wasn't disciplining, or at least not to the level that you had with your own parents or teachers. And, they were kind of rooting for you, your friends' parents, even when you got older, maybe especially when you got older after you left for school and you come back and see them. They always wanted to hear that you were doing well, and they wanted your lives to go well. It was this completely unbiased, uncomplicated relationship. I also remember kind of paying close attention to what they said and what their opinions were, because you would get a little bit more of what people really thought. I don't know. You'd hear something about another parent, like, "Oh, she's a real piece of work," and you'd be like, I thought she was a piece of work too, but now you're getting it kind of confirmed, some of your own opinions. Because they weren't, they weren't trying to keep you in line. They didn't have to kind of toe the line. They didn't have to keep the the party line on something, which I understand now as a teacher. Like you gotta keep certain messages consistent. But you didn't have to do that with your friends' parents. They weren't trying to do that with you. They weren't trying to keep a message consistent. So I loved some of those relationships. They really added to a rich world that I felt as a child. I was going to say to a rich social world, but it was such an important thing for me, those relationships, that it actually built what it felt like my whole world. That was a big part of my whole world. My relationships with people in general, and those were special ones. It can get kind of salty in my head. My inner monologue is no stranger to curse words, especially the ones with some kick. But I think on this podcast, and maybe in general, I put out a kind of going with the flow, spirituality guy vibe. So I think I'm going to start digging a little deeper into my mind here for you guys. And maybe I have a new segment called Off-Brand, because I know there's some things that I do that are definitely off-brand from that image. First thing I thought about was a couple weeks ago during the World Juniors Hockey Tournament, which is, I think I talked about before, some best on best hockey. It's like guys 20 and under. When we got to like the semifinal round, Canada lost. Maybe it was 2 consecutive days where Canada lost and then the United States won. And I think I noticed I liked Canada losing more. I was more excited about that than I was about the Americans winning. So how's that for loving all my brothers and sisters on earth, huh? Spiritual guy. Hey, Kate joined a new group. It's kind of like a Making Friends in New York City group. I think I mentioned before some of her best friends moved away and started having kids, and it's been kind of hard to meet new people. And so she's got this one little group, and I think she met up with this one girl, Juliana, once. And then they were trying to arrange another hang session with this larger group. And so there were some messages going around. And there was 3 of them talking about meeting up. And this Juliana woman said something like, you two make plans to meet. Maybe, I've got to do X, Y, and Z. But you two make plans and maybe I'll make it. And I really wanted Kate to respond being like, God damn it, Juliana. You always do this. Quit being so passive-aggressive and just try to accommodate somebody for once. In her second text to the girl, or third text of all time. She didn't go for it, but I thought it would have been good. Just lay it out there. Well, I'll just finish off with, I was doing laundry this week, and I just wanted to say I'm glad that the laundry detergent manufacturers put those little level lines on the cap of the bottle. It's great to know that if I want my clothes just kind of clean, I have that option. That's it for this week. Hope everyone's well. Peace and love.